Lean on me. That's good. That's real good. Can we appreciate the band and their contribution? To all of you who have gathered on this day, we are glad to see you. I am glad to be back with you after some time away, and the work still continues. And so as we have gathered, we gather to not only lean on one another, but to also walk with one another, because the struggle is still ahead of us. I am honored and privileged to stand in the stead and on behalf of our leader, the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr., who is always somewhere where there is a fight going on. And since he has been our champion for over 50 years, we continue to thank God for his heart and his health. He puts all that he has on the line for all of us, and we ought to at least appreciate him as he goes to work for us. A lot's been going on, and so I think it's important that we always start with a moment of framing where we are. Sometimes progress is hard to measure in the midst of the noise of what happens in the news. There are crises, everything from the public health issue of the coronavirus, but also to the virus that has become a bad politics in our country. We have been overwhelmed by an indifferent politics for so long now, it feels like it's the new normal. But every now and then you have to look for the glimpses of hope and possibility that come by way of news you may not have anticipated. This week we got some news. The Antilynching Bill on the House side that was sponsored by our brother, our friend, our leader, Congressman Bobby Rush, passed the House of Representatives. Y'all can do better than that. The Antilynching Bill passed the House of Representatives. And here's why it's important. The first anti-lynching bill was actually written in 1902. It has taken well over 100 years to get a public acknowledgement that mass mob violence that's racially motivated is wrong. This week, the House of Representatives addressed that issue, and now, because the bill has been written to conform with the Senate version that passed some weeks ago, the only thing left to happen is that the Senate must now vote up or down. They don't have to debate. They don't have to go to conference. All they need to do is vote on the House version of the bill that's coming back over, and then the bill goes to the president's desk for signing. In the backdrop, this is an opportunity when the president says, "What do black folks have to lose?" We're going to see. Will you sign this bill, or will you hold it hostage to the politics of racial cynicism that normalizes Charlottesville and denies racial justice? And so we celebrate and thank God for Congressman Bobby Rush, and so send him a note, tell him thank you for taking the lead on that bill. But this is also an important weekend because the first Sunday of March every year is the time that we commemorate the sacrifices of Bloody Sunday, the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, fighting for the right to participate in the franchise, the citizenship privilege of voting, the right to vote. And so we remember now this weekend, on the day when the South Carolina primary is happening, Super Tuesday is coming, that there is a lot at stake in this election. And it's not about the personality, it's about the policy. We don't have a personality problem in this country. We have a policy problem in this country. Reverend often reminds us that if your policies are not appropriate, doesn't matter what kind of face you give it, it's still wrong. We're dealing with whether or not the country will stand up for that which is right in what will be the most consequential presidential election in our lifetimes, where the balance of power in the Congress is going to affect our ability to protect the civil rights laws that were passed as part of that great process of challenging the Constitution's reach, and did it apply to everybody? But more importantly, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution are what we call the Civil War Amendments. They were amended to the Constitution in the aftermath of the fight over slavery, and slavery was an economic issue. This election is about the economics of our time. It's about who gets the value and who gets the blame. And too often, those who are at the bottom have been blamed for their condition, while those at the top continue to walk away with the benefits at their expense. The question for the rest of us, regardless of whether our state or status is of high possibility or maybe somewhere where we're starting with meager resources, we've got to put the best of who we are out there, because the balance of the power of the future of generations yet unborn is going to depend on what we do in the next 9 months. Here's why it's particularly important. Being born in the Deep South, I've had a chance to see how we normalize certain relationships. Sometimes we just embrace things as the way things are without questioning them. But when you then find the inner fortitude to decide that you're going to push back against that which has been normalized, you find in yourself the inner strength to stand and say, this is no longer acceptable to me, because who I am at my core demands better than this. If you don't deserve better than what you've gotten, then you just stand off to the side. Some of the rest of us got something else to fight for. And so we're not telling you you got to get in it, but what we're trying to tell you is don't get in the way of it. If we've got to move forward, we're going to move forward with who's ready to go. And sometimes that means you've got to challenge what has become the conventional thinking. As we are talking about how we lay this thing out, let me just start with a couple of things that you can do to help, and then I'll put some points on the table, and then we'll get ready to go back out in the street and raise this struggle. Is that all right? Here's what we got. One is we've got to invest in voter mobilization. We've got to register, educate, and mobilize in every primary in every state, because every vote absolutely matters. There are local, state, and congressional races even before you get to who's going to run for the presidency, and all of those elected offices have an impact on what happens in our communities. We've got to raise it. Here's how you can partner. You heard Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson talk about how you can support the work. Sending us to Wall Street for a trip is not what this is all about. We're going to Wall Street. Reverend is convening us in Wall Street because we're on a mission. We don't need a vacation. We got work to do. And so while we're going about the work, we've also got to do the work of helping to mobilize the vote. And so if you believe that we ought to engage in those places where very often our communities are oppressed and suppressed in their opportunities to participate in the franchise, here's how you can support it. You can text RPC GOTV, RPC GOTV to 41444 and put in the amount to help with our voter mobilization, our GOTV efforts. We've got to be serious about this work. And and if you can't text it, you can go to rainbowpush.org, scroll down, you'll see the banner to be able to click on it, and we'll be able to partner together, because we've got to get our folks to the polls by whatever process means is necessary, because every vote is going to matter. Now, because we're on a mission, somebody say mission. Yeah, see, when you're on a mission, mission is about mindset. Reverend often speaks to the mindset of who we are, that we ought to have a high insult level. Some things ought to offend us just because they're wrong. The reason we're going to Wall Street is because Wall Street has become the symbol of economic injustice that benefits an exclusive club. Take, for example, the top 400 wealthiest people in the country paid a lower effective tax rate than the bottom 50% of the rest of us. Something about that is just wrong. When we talk about the fact that companies are continuing to profit while poor communities are continuing to suffer, there's something wrong with that. We ought to be on a mission. When we talk about the fact that they're now looking to redevelop those places that have been economically devastated and calling them opportunity zones, we don't have a problem with opportunity, but we want to make sure that opportunity applies to everybody and not just the developers. And so if all we're going to do is pad bottom lines, and we're going to exclude money managers and professional services and folks who have products that they're trying to get to market, if we're not going to address the access to capital question that is still an issue when community banks closed by the dozens after the stress testing of the last Great Recession, we've got to recognize that if we don't stand up and fight for what is in our best interest, we're going to be endorsing the suffering that's going to come as a result of our indifference. I didn't think that you all would kind of get with that, because reality checks kind of make us a little uncomfortable. But I would raise for you this morning this story. It's told in all of the Gospels. John has a slightly different variation of it, and it's one day the disciples are hanging out. The crowds are following the work because they're impressed by the impact that Jesus and the disciples are doing. And about the time that the sun was setting, it was time to feed the people. The disciples said, Jesus, it's time to feed the people. Let's send them home because they're about to be hungry. How often have we heard that to be the response of the system, that just when the people's needs now rise to the forefront, it's time to dismiss them, to leave them to deal with their issues on their own? Jesus says, no, don't send them away. Have them sit down, and you're going to address the needs of the people. See, if we're going to be just in the 21st century, if we're going to do what's right by the least of these, we cannot send them away in the midst of their suffering and deny them the affirmation of human dignity. We've got to recognize that we have an obligation to address their pain. And many of us, we may not say it because we're in pain too. We're hurting because the healthcare system is stacked against us. We're hurting because we can't get a livable wage. Other folks are getting paid off the charts, corporate CEOs and the like, but we can't get a $15 an hour bare minimum wage tied to the indexing of the inflation rate for those who have to, watch this now, work every day and very often more than one job just to be able to keep a roof over their head and lights on in the house. We've got to be able to recognize that now is the time for us to step up and stand up and not displace and deny the issues of the people in real time. Wall Street is not just a place, it's a symbol. Wall Street is only 8 blocks long. It's one of the shortest streets that you're going to find in New York. But symbolically, it is one of the most powerful places in terms of its impact, because as we've seen this week, just from the mere concern that this virus that cannot yet be contained is scaring the markets have dropped exponentially in times that we've not seen, and everybody's about to panic, not because people are dying, but because rich people are losing their money. Something's wrong with that. We've gotten our mindset displaced because we're more concerned about the wealthy, and we have no concern for the needy. When we look at the budget that the president is putting forth, nobody's challenging the fact that while we're continuing to invest in corporations, we're disinvesting in education, in fair housing. We're disinvesting in those who need supplemental nutrition. We used to call them food stamps when we had the coupon booklet. Now they get the electronic card to be able to do something, but you got to be able to put food on your table. And that was the dilemma. 5,000 people been hanging out. And just when it's time to address their issue, they want to send them away. Tell your neighbor, I ain't going nowhere. First thing is we've got to recognize that simply because they try to make you leave does not mean you have to leave. There was a mantra that we used to say back in the days of the movement when they told us we could not stand where we needed to stand to raise the issue that we needed to raise. Every now and then you've got to find a little bit of indignity, maybe even a lot of it, and just stand your ground and say, hell no. We won't go. Y'all better talk back to me. I think y'all heard it before. Every now and then, we've got to find the sense of resistance that says we will not accommodate injustice for the sake of expediency. If we must disrupt, if we must disturb, if we must make folks lose sleep at night, if we got to show up at City Hall, if we got to show up at the Town Hall, if we got to show up at the White House, if we have to show up at the Congress, and oh, by the way, yes, if we got to go to Wall Street, we're going to go wherever we have to go to make sure that the needs of the people are not denied. Here's what Jesus says to the disciples. No, we're not going to ignore them. We're going to affirm them. The issue is, number one, is that we must make sure that the human dignity of every single person is not only affirmed, but it's protected. When you take the problems of people and you push them off to the side, basically you're saying not only is the problem not important, the people who have the problem don't matter. Everybody matters. That was at the root of the Poor People's Campaign when Dr. King was putting that in place, that led Reverend Jackson to begin to start Operation Breadbasket, and now has us here in 2020. It is the affirmation that everybody matters. You know what Reverend says, I am somebody. Everybody is somebody, and if we push the somebodies off to the side, it leaves everybody else to walk away with their interest unchallenged. Jesus says, make them sit down. But then there's this usual response that we hear from the system. We don't have enough to address the needs of all these folk. Y'all heard that before, right? We go to the government and say we need more for education. We need more for fair housing. We need an anti-poverty program. Well, they say we can't afford that. We need to take care of the issue of reparations, damage for the harm that's been done. We can't afford that. We don't have enough. Well, that's always the excuse, but simply because they give you an excuse does not mean you should back down from your demand. Don't change your mind about what is your right, what's your entitlement, simply because somebody said they don't have it. Can I tell you something? They got it for some other stuff that they want. Other folks get what they need. Other communities get what they want. Why is it that those that are the least amongst us that are always put last on the agenda? Here's what they forgot. They forgot that sometimes the issue is not what I have on the outside, it's what's driving me on the inside. See, if you affirm the human dignity of people, they tap into what's on the inside of them, and then they use it to propel themselves into the place of not only recognition, but affirmation. If we're going to have, in this year as we go to Wall Street, a call for a moral economic agenda, it's immoral to put the needs of the masses on hold for the benefit of a few. It's immoral to not close the racial wealth gap, which is wider today than it was before the Great Recession. When black families have 10 cents on the dollar of wealth to white families, that's immoral, and we must call it out. When you have highly qualified, highly competent, highly trained black professionals who can't find access to the careers in white corporate America, that's immoral. When we don't have representation on corporate boards and the boards reflect who's getting the money, but the people who buy their products reflect the rest of us, something about that is immoral. And if we don't call out the immorality of an exploitative economic system, then we're going to then be co-conspirators with the system that's trying to deny us. Jesus says, tell them sit down because they matter. And then they say, well, we don't have enough. He says, well, give me what you got. See, here's what I want you to understand. Simply because somebody says that they didn't think about you when they were trying to figure out what the budget was, does not mean that you cannot force them to change their priorities because you decide that you're not going nowhere. Jesus says, you may not have enough for everybody, but you got enough for them. And so now we need to make sure that the issues of our community are raised up, because the next thing we need is we need to make sure that the communities that are disaffected have economic prosperity too. At the end of the day, we know what it's like not to have had enough. But if we look at the last 400 and now 401 years almost of the economic enterprise in the original 13 colonies that was known as slavery, when they got centuries of free labor, either by the process of slavery or prison leasing, prison convict leasing in the country. There's a lot of capital that flowed at the expense and exposure of the most vulnerable, and no one has gone back to say we must do right by this. The notion is that somehow or other trickle down works. Trickle-down economics, I believe you remember when Ronald Reagan was running the first time, and he was running against Bush 41. They were competitors in that first primary. And remember, Ronald Reagan started talking about trickle-down economics. And remember what George H.W. Bush's response was? He said trickle-down economics was voodoo economics, that there was something evil about the economic system. But watch this. When you get the alignment of interest before you know it, what did Ronald Reagan do? Instead of making George H.W. Bush his competitor, he made him his colleague, because then when you align the interest, it doesn't matter what you call it as long as you're benefiting from it. We got to call it out for what it is and make sure that the economic prosperity of the nation it advances the interest of the masses. So here's what we got: dignity, economic prosperity, and then you got to have courage. So remember, they have this issue, 5,000 people, not counting the women and children. These just the men. They're hungry, and the disciples aren't prepared. Little boy happens to be walking around that day, and thank God for somebody that had a plan. He happens to have his little lunch sack with him. It's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, we know if we were to think rationally about it, if you only got 5 loaves and 2 fish, surely you cannot feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Well, this isn't about whether you can feed all of them, but you can feed some of them. What are we going to do with the 5 loaves and 2 fish of the United States budget that gets passed trillions of dollars? You may not be able to address all the issues, but you can address some of the issues. You may not be able to fix every problem, but you can fix some of the problems. Y'all ain't talking to me. See, at the end of the day, we're so accustomed to being excluded, we like being last because somehow or other that's become the norm. We'd rather be in the line. But no, I don't just want to be in the line. I want to be on the agenda, because if I'm on the agenda, my place in line, eventually they're going to call my number. Can I tell you, anybody ever been to the post office? You know, the post office, they have these little things, these little dials, and you take the little tab, and the tab's got a number on it, and you got to go wait until you see the number on your paper come up on the sign. That's for the post office. That's not for politics. You don't have to wait for your number to be called. What has called your number is that you're a citizen. You determine when your number gets called by raising your voice to make your voice heard and your demand known. Because now what you have is the third and final thing is that you got to have agency. You got to have the courage to take what's available, use it for the benefit of the economic prosperity of the most vulnerable, so that then they have agency. Say agency. I know it's Saturday, it's a little warm in here. We get a little sleepy when the temperature gets above a certain point. But agency is important, because agency is the ability to self-determine. I should not be limited in terms of my possibilities because the structure is stacked against me. I ought to be able, as a byproduct of the structure, to be equipped and empowered to do all that my heart and my head might inspire me to do. And so in the process, agency is not some abstract. Agency is what we called back in the day power to the people. Power to the people is what this is all about. This is about making sure that the people have what they need to determine for themselves how they will affirm their dignity. I need to tell you this. There was a study that came out a few weeks ago that said that there was an intentional devaluation of the properties of black folk as opposed to white folks as standard practice. Now, here's where y'all supposed to say, no, for real. You already knew that. But when the system now has to admit it, it ought to remind us that we have not yet reached the point where we can trust the system to police itself. We've got to make sure that we remain present until our needs are addressed. What are you saying? I'm glad you asked. The 5,000 people, they didn't leave until they got what they needed. Don't you go anywhere until you get what you're supposed to have. Don't you change your mind until they take your needs seriously, and don't you back down until somebody recognizes that you have dignity and agency. You have the recognition to be able to say, I'm black and I'm proud, but at the same time to say, until I get what is mine, my dignity will not allow me to endorse your treating me the way that I'm not supposed to be treated. We ought to stand up, rise up, speak up until we get all that we are supposed to have. Now, before I get ready to go to my seat, I got to go. I know I said that 2 times. Preachers get 3 times. You know, that's what we do. We got to pass 3 exits before we finally take the one before the road runs out. So I got one more. At the end of the text in John's gospel, after the needs of the people were met, something interesting happens. Go home and read it. It says that the disciples picked up the scraps from the 5 loaves and the 2 fish that weren't enough to feed the 5,000. They picked up the scraps and walked away with 12 baskets full. Now, that's typically where church folk kind of get caught up in what they say is the miracle, but I want to talk about the mindset. See, it's interesting to me that those who claim to be of the entitled class, not concerned about the needs of the people, did not bring enough to be able to take care of the needs of the people, but they're carrying 12 baskets with them. I'm getting ready to talk to you about mindset for a minute. Those who control the system always walk around with the intent to benefit from the system, even when the system doesn't have enough to take care of your issues. Y'all missed it right there, so let me come back and replay it one more time. You only had 5 loaves and 2 fish that you hijacked. You didn't bring anything to address the masses, but you walking around with 12 baskets because you're entitled to benefit from every situation that you come across. And that's why I need you to be ready to fight against the structures that we are facing in 2020, because those that are running the structure are carrying the baskets and they're trying to benefit at your expense. Don't let them get their baskets. Let them not get a scrap until you get what you demand, because Reverend says that everybody is somebody. And if that includes you, tell your neighbor, I'm in it to win it. You ain't say it to the right neighbor. Tell the other neighbor, I'm in it to win it. I ain't going nowhere. I'm not changing my mind. I'm not accommodating your low expectations, because I'm in it to win it. And until I get exactly what I am going to get, I'm going to say this: hell no, we won't go. If that's you, come on, thank God for the opportunity to struggle together, to fight together, to go to justice together. Now, as we get ready to finish this time, and Reverend Jeanette, you're going to come help me in just a moment. We've got to be serious about this. If you're not registered, get registered. If you've got a teenager in your house, they're going to be 18 before the general election. Don't just let them sign up for selective service. Let them sign up to vote. Let's make sure that everybody who has the will to fight has the tools to be able to fight. Because at the end of the day, you may not have what looks like a lot to everybody else, but you have enough to be able to address your concern. I thank you for giving me a bit of your time. I'll see you on the battlefield.